Tonight on Lupin the Third, a doomsday cult foretells the end of humanity as disaster upon disaster occurs around the world, and Lupin is caught right in the crosshairs. In order to steal the lost book of Nostradamus, Lupin's on the trail of a kidnapped daughter of a politician who's the key to everything. Will our heroes save humanity from utter annihilation? Find out on Lupin the Third. Farewell to Nostradamus. You know the channel. Lupin III, Farewell to Nostradamus, also known as Die Nostradamus, and alternatively known in English as To Hell with Nostradamus, is the fourth animated theatrical Lupin film released in April 1995. Apparently beginning production as a live-action movie, it was the first theatrical movie in the series since 1985's Legend of the Gold of Babylon, and the first Lupin project released after the passing of Yasuo Yamada earlier that year. Yamada intended to take up the role again for the movie, even recording some trailers, but his hospitalization and death prevented this. Some producers discussed ending the anime series after Yamada's passing, but due to the success of the TV specials, they ultimately decided to keep going. But they needed someone to pick up the mantle of Lupin, and there was a bit of debate about who would take over the role going forward. One potential choice was Yoshito Yasuhara, a student of Yamada's who you might know from Cat's Eye and Fist of the North Star, and who later voiced Arsène Lupin in Lupin Zero, as well as having some minor roles in parts 2 and 3. He would take over some of Yamada's dubbing roles, but wasn't selected to replace Lupin, and the producers instead chose Kanichi Kurita. Kurita had made a name for himself in Japan as a comedian and imitator, and Yamada's Lupin voice was part of his repertoire. He had done an impression of Yamada's voice several times by that point, in official and unofficial capacities, with a famous story involving him leaving a voice message on Yamada's phone in Lupin's voice, which the original actor found humorous. It's said that Yamada approved Kurita to inherit the position should he pass on, although Kurita has denied this. Now, Kurita was not a trained voice actor. In fact, even today, outside of the Lupin franchise, he hasn't lent his voice to many projects at all. He was surprised that TMS wanted him to fill in for Nostradamus, but accepted it as a way to honor Yamada's legacy, thinking that it would only be for a single project, which, of course, wasn't the case. To this day, he has been very humble in his praise for Yamada's groundwork, creating the Lupin we all know and love. We'll examine how Kurita evolved in the role as the retrospective continues, but starting off with a theatrical release certainly had to put pressure on him to fit into Yamada's shoes. The position of director fell to two men, Shunya Ito, who previously directed several exploitation films and the 1985 movie Grey Sunset, and Takeshi Shirato, whose credits include Gegege no Kitaro and Space Battleship Yamato. Ito also worked on the script alongside Lupin TV special writer Hiroshi Kashiwabara. One of the biggest inspirations for the script was the Japanese religious cult Aum Shinrikyo. They had been in operation for years by this point, and had already carried out several domestic terrorist attacks, including assassinations. They're perhaps most infamous for the Tokyo subway sarin attack that occurred on March 20th, 1995, just a month before this movie released, and which, coincidentally, overshadowed some news coverage of the unrelated death of Yamada. Kashiwabara and Ito aimed to criticize the cult through this movie, penning a story about a doomsday cult bringing about the world's end. Telecom was once again brought in to do the animation, although it was not an easy process. According to Yasuo Otsuka, the team worked day in, day out for 8 months straight, often working into the night to finish the movie. As a result, the company refused to work on the series afterwards until 2007's Elusiveness of the Fog. Despite these hardships, the film was released on April 22, 1995, with a trailer calling it the first Lupin work to rival The Castle of Cagliostro, a bold claim that I cannot imagine many agree with. Not that Nostradamus is bad, quite the opposite actually. It has received generally positive reviews in Japan and abroad since its release. I've been a bit of a booster for this movie in the Lupin fandom since I first saw it, but compared to the other films, fans don't talk about this one as much. Watching it again, its flaws are definitely more apparent, but I still think it's a bit underrated. I'll explain why, but let's start by looking at the plot. Farewell to Nostradamus begins in the future year of 1999, and the Nostradamus sect claims that recent disasters were foretold in a book of prophecies by Michel Nostradamus. In actuality, their leader Risley is orchestrating these disasters alongside his henchman Chris to consolidate power. During a staged plane hijacking, they kidnap the young daughter of media figurehead Douglas, who's planning to run for president of the US. Fujiko is after the prophecy book, which Douglas just so happens to have inside a vault located on top of his Earth Tower, and which the cult is also after. With the cult gaining power and the world at risk of doomsday, it's a mad dash to stop the Nostradamus sect and their Armageddon. There's quite a lot to take in with this adventure, as it covers a lot of ground in its runtime. Doomsday cults, political strife, an explosive finale, and, as Discotheque puts it, gratuitous 90s virtual reality. And on an individual story beat level, I think the movie succeeds. It's an adventure on a global scale with plenty of trips between North and South America, but also one that feels deliberately smaller. The focus is almost always on the Lupin gang, and through their eyes, it lets us sink into the story relatively easily. That's all well and good, but this movie does feel very aimless. It tackles so much stuff that, inevitably, many of its concepts are underdeveloped. Not to mention, the movie just doesn't bring everything together properly. Once again, it feels like they came up with the individual scenes independently rather than finding ways to tie everything together naturally. Thinking about it, if you ignore the higher animation budget, it feels a lot like a Lupin TV special in its structure, where it bounces a lot of ideas around and sees what sticks, although perhaps that's only because I've been watching a lot of those recently, so they're more on the mind than Cagliostro and Mamo. Let's take one scene in particular during the climax, where Lupin and Julia escape the crumbling tower by hitting a water slide and skiing down a full ski ramp complete with artificial snow, which are, for some reason, located inside a skyscraper. I'm not saying this is a 100% unrealistic thing to find in a building like this, but I imagine the team wanted to have a skiing and water slide sequence, but had to cram it into a setting where it doesn't naturally fit. It is explained earlier, so it isn't a logical leap, it just made the narrative seem scattershot. Again, I like all these movies' plot threads separately, and things like this are only a problem if you scrutinize it. If you don't care about any of that, it won't be a problem for you. And what I really missed in this entry compared to some of the others is the intrigue. There isn't as much mystery this time around, and the only twists in there are incredibly obvious, not because they're telegraphed or anything, but because the twists seem like the only natural conclusion, which I guess means they aren't really twists, but whatever. Anyway, as a Lupin adventure, Nostradamus mostly hits the mark. It is nowhere near a fully cohesive adventure like Mystery of Mamo or Castle of Cagliostro, and hell, even Legend of the Gold of Babylon had a tighter grip on its storyline. The real strengths of this movie lie in its scene-to-scene spectacle, because despite the characters grounding the story, this is still a grand narrative. The climax may not have the full impact it deserves, but it is undoubtedly full of action and intensity. The final fight between Lupin and Chris is well done, and with most of the characters coming together for a thrilling and dangerous resolution and lots of set pieces, it's very eye-catching. That's what I like most about Nostradamus. It still holds its own as a movie despite the binding not being very solid. The sum of the parts is greater than the whole here, but the parts hold enough weight to carry the movie forward. There isn't much standout in the Lupin gang this time on a character front. They're mostly in their expected roles that we've seen from them by this point. Lupin is probably the most multifaceted, kind and compassionate, yet still pretty perverted, and slightly clever, although we mostly see him figuring things out on the fly in this one. This is Kanichi Kurita's first performance as Lupin, and in retrospect, he does sound quite similar to Yamada here, but with enough differences to make his performance stand out. At least in this movie, he sounds much younger with a bit of a harsher tone, something that would only get more defined as time goes on. He also feels a little unconfident here, as if he's still finding the right voice, and it will be a while before Kurita's recognizable vocal qualities start to take center stage. For now, it's a bit shaky, but not bad at all, and certainly a performance that does Yamada justice. Kurita has mentioned in interviews that he never felt quite right stepping into the role at the time, and it's only after doing more projects and talking with the other cast members that he started to feel comfortable in the role. I'll say up front that I do overall prefer Yamada's voice, but Kurita has proven to be a very worthy successor, and it'll be interesting to look back at how he settled into the role. Jigen falls into his Lupin's assistant role for a lot of the adventure. He gets some cool moments in the middle of the movie, but otherwise just kinda tags around Lupin. And Goemon is just kinda there. He gets one scene to shine in the second act, but that's about it, and even that one isn't all that spectacular. Fujiko starts out solid in her guise as Julia's tutor, then loses steam midway through before kind of picking up the slack in the final act. Finally, Zenigata also doesn't have much to do in this one and spends a lot of the movie just hopping in and out as the story wills him to. So not stellar on the Lupin gang front this time. For the Lupin girl, we have Julia, a spunky little kid who's quite enjoyable, even if she is in danger and getting kidnapped throughout the whole story. Kid characters can be hit or miss in this franchise, but I think Julia is one of the better ones. I imagine some might find her annoying, but I think she earns her attitude and sentimentality. Yumi Adachi does a fine job voicing her. Any quirks can probably be attributed to lousy voice direction.
家へ帰っても面白くないんだもん。ダディとマミーの頭は選挙とお金だけ。藤子と一緒に旅行してた方が楽しいよ。
Our main antagonist, Risley, on the other hand, is pretty underutilized. He doesn't really appear that much until the end, and by then, his henchman Chris has almost commandeered the story. There have been other cult leaders in this series who are more memorable. I mean, this ain't no Rasputin, but Jose Komatsu does a solid job voicing him.
暗黒の闇の中に飲み込まれようとしている。だがそれに気づいている人間はほんのわずかしかいない。
But talking of Chris, he is an okay villain, even if he is a bit of a generic tough guy, with a suitably generic name to match. Akio Otsuka does a spectacular job voicing him, which isn't surprising as he's also the voice of Solid Snake, Blackjack, Bateau, and oh yeah, Daisuke freaking Jigen wants Kiyoshi Kobayashi retired in 2021.
お前も食えない男だな。サメにまで嫌われたが。
However, many other characters don't get nearly enough screen time and development. Julia's parents, Dudley and Mary/Maria, are kind of bland. Their conflict seems so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It drives the plot forward, but how it ties into everything is flimsy. The Brazilian kid Sergio is probably the biggest victim of this movie's directionless nature and wild ambitions, though Takaki Hayashi does well with what he's given. And hell, I didn't even talk about Lupin's uncle, or maybe not uncle depending on the translation, Philip, who's vital to the story but makes no impression otherwise. It all culminates in an uneven yet mostly solid character lineup where everyone fills their expected roles nicely, but doesn't go beyond that. That's true of the English dub as well, another Funimation production with the same cast and crew as before. The little dialogue additions and changes to the script mostly work, but some adjustments really bother me. Like, in the original script, there's a joke where Julia calls Lupin a pedophile based on some misunderstandings, and yeah, that's a pretty loaded concept for a joke, but trust me, it makes sense in context and doesn't feel unnecessarily creepy. But the dub runs with this joke far longer, to the point where it gets incredibly annoying, and if you didn't like this joke in the Japanese version, you will absolutely despise it in the dub. The cast for the Lupin gang is still as decent as before. I don't have many notes on that front, although I did get more of a kick out of Philip Wilburn's Zenigata than before. Laura Bailey is fantastic as Julia, energetic and appropriately childish with the same courage as in the Japanese version. And yes, the pedophile joke ruins a lot of otherwise solid dialogue, but Bailey has such conviction as the character that I don't mind that much.
Is that you, pedophile? I knew you'd come to rescue me, but don't worry, once I lead him to the vault, we've got him for sure. Just leave it all to me.
I wasn't that big on Josh Martin's voice for Risley. The tone doesn't really match the character design, and maybe him having a weaker and snobbier voice compared to his stature was the point, but it just doesn't land for me.
It is a bleak day, my friends, for today I come bearing bad tidings. However, you should take comfort. Of all Nostradamus' prophecies, the one in which I'm about to share is the most relevant for our times.
Actually, you know who this reminds me of?
Unacceptable? Did you see the pool? They flipped the bitch!
Anyway, Damian Clark fits the voice of Chris much better. Clark did an outstanding job as Keith in Voyage to Danger, and once again nails it in an admittedly very similar role.
I understand you're also looking for the lost book of prophecy. I hope Uncle Philip managed to give you some parting advice. Otherwise, you won't be able to steal it and sell it to me.
Bryce Armstrong gives us another pretty strong performance as Douglas. The character isn't quite as evil as Chin Chin Chu, whom Bryce also voiced, but Armstrong hits that Nixon-esque intimidation that fits Douglas well.
No, it's not over. I won't give up. The fools! This tower is not coming down!
And honestly, I want to give a huge shout out to Colleen Clinkenbeard for giving it her all as Mary. She takes a character that I didn't care about in the Japanese version and actually got me invested. If the original script gave her a better storyline, I'd be more inclined to sing the character's praises, but Clinkenbeard does an excellent job with the script she's given.
Now I see what kind of man you are, Douglas. Are you telling me that you want to take advantage of your only daughter's kidnapping just to win an election? You should be ashamed of yourself. Who cares about the damned election? You're her father. That should come first.
I don't have a standout line to show him off because he has so few lines, but I also want to highlight Aaron Dismuke, who voiced Alphonse in the 2003 Full Metal Alchemist series and who does a stellar job in this limited role. As far as the storytelling and script is concerned, I actually think Nostradamus' English dub is a very respectable effort. It's one of the few times that I think a dub more or less matches the original Japanese script and voices, and if you're adamantly against subs or just prefer English versions, you're in luck this time, as it's on almost even footing in my eyes. And regardless of language, you'll be treated to some great animation. While not as sharp as Mamo or as breathtaking as Cagliostro, Nostradamus still holds up pretty well in motion. There's quite a few cool shots in this one, including some motion tracking and rotation shots. You can definitely see the film budget on display. The characters are also animated well, with plenty of expressive facial and body animations. Animation director Kenji Hachizaki has a great eye for fluidity, not surprising given his work as an animation director on several of Telecom's Western TV shows and Fuma Conspiracy. And he'd also return as an animation director for several Lupin TV specials, as well as other projects like Detective Conan and Megalobox. I couldn't verify this, but I did see a lot of influence on Western animated films in the animation department. Like, I recently rewatched Disney's The Great Mouse Detective a few days before starting the script for this video, and I got a very similar vibe out of them both. If not influenced by that movie, then they at least pull in similar directions. Which is crazy since The Great Mouse Detective's finale took heavy inspiration from Castle of Cagliostro. I might be correlating two things that shouldn't be compared here, but it's an interesting parallel. Kenji Hachizaki also worked on the character designs, and they're pretty decent. Not anything extraordinary, and the faces and body structures can sometimes feel flat, but they look solid enough overall. I can't say that all the characters look great. Maria's prominent forehead doesn't look right to me, but nothing that struck me as awful. What stuck out to me is the futuristic look, a benefit of the then-future setting of 1999, likely done to tie into the new millennium, as well as the 2000 US election and the 1996 Summer Olympics, which did occur in Atlanta like this movie, even if the 2000 games were instead hosted in Sydney. But anyway, the Earth Tower, which acts as the primary setting, is essentially a contained city inside a giant skyscraper, and it's just realistic enough that you kinda buy its fantastical elements. It also contrasts nicely with Lupin's more low-tech inventions and style, and while it doesn't lean into a Lupin in the New Millennium angle, it is an interesting backdrop. There's also some really good musical cues from Yuji Ono in this one. I feel like I've been fairly dismissive of some of his work in the past few retrospectives, and it's nice to hear him get back on form. I especially like the music during the finale. It's energetic and fast-paced, but threatening and brooding at the same time. And the ending theme, I Know Suzuki, composed by Ono and performed by Iori Sakagami with lyrics written by Yoji Arakawa, is pleasant and very nostalgic. Fitting for the adventure for sure, and a bit of an underrated ending theme if I do say so myself. You know, for all its faults and lack of planning, I still find myself enjoying Farewell to Nostradamus. When I first rewatched this for the video, I definitely nitpicked it heavily, and a lot of my notes focused on the lack of cohesion and plot elements that felt undercooked compared to other Lupin stories. Yet, on watching it twice more, once with the English dub, I remembered why I've always sung this movie's praises. It isn't going to impress anyone looking for something new from the Lupin series, and sure, it tried to reach something far more ambitious than the end result met. But all the elements work well enough for me to still recommend this one, even if it is a bit of a softer recommendation. Japanese audio, or English dub, or even your spoken language dub if it exists, because I never talk about those. However you like it, I'd check this one out. You can tell that this movie suffered due to its rush production, but TMS apparently did not learn from their mistakes, as they greenlit another animated film that premiered just 1 year after Nostradamus hit theaters. And before we get to that, we have another TV special to tackle, Pursue Harry Mouse's Treasure, which I'm sure will both be entertaining and have no problematic elements whatsoever. Until then though, I'm just gonna bask in the warm comfort of Nostradamus again.
おいおい、予言書に書いてなかったかい？ジュリアがルパン4世を継ぐって。